Hey everyone, this is BlendMaster here with another tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to create this cool outdoor scene in Blender. And we're going to start by focusing on these rocks and how to create the procedural texture so that you can use these rocks in any scene that you create and they'll always look good. And we'll also go over how to create the grass in Blender and how to set up the particle system so that it looks more realistic. So let's get started. First thing we want to do is delete the cube and the lamp, and then we're going to go over to Cycles Render Engine and go to Front View and Orthographic View. I'm going to press Shift A and add in a icosphere. And I'm going to open up a new window so we can add in a node editor and create our rock material. But before I do that, I'm going to quickly add a subdivision surface modifier to our sphere and set the shading to smooth so it'll be just a little bit more smooth. And I'm also going to add in a environment texture. You can use any environment texture that you have. I'm just going to use this one that I took. And I'm going to uncheck camera visibility and also change the background to transparent. So now we can start working on our rock material. First thing we're going to be doing is adding a Musgrave texture. And I'll press Ctrl Shift and left click so we can see it. And since I have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, I can press Ctrl T and it automatically brings up the mapping node and our texture coordinate node. And we don't want to be using the generated coordinates, we want to actually use the object coordinates for this. And I'm going to bring the scale down to... no, I think I'll leave the scale at 5. And I want to just increase the detail to 16, decrease the dimensions to 0, and then increase this value to about 2.5. So that's looking good. Now I want to add in a color ramp node so we can change the color of our texture. I want to make this first color a dark gray, something like that, and then make a tan color for our second one. So something like that's good. Then we want to add in a dark green color. So I think something like that will do. Maybe a little darker. And then we want to add in a dark red / brown color. Something like that will look good. Right now it's a little too bright, so I might add in or decrease this white to light gray. Something like that. Maybe a little brighter. And that's looking good. So now you can just space these out however you want to get something that you like. I think that's good. And I'm going to drag these out a little more. And I want to add in a stripe across our icosphere so it looks a little random and like it's been weathered down. So to do that, we're going to add in a noise texture. Bring in the object coordinates again, decrease the scale to 0.75, increase this detail to 16, add in another color ramp, bring this factor value in and take a look at it. We're going to add in another value or another marker, set this color to 1 or white, then take this marker, set it to 0.48, and take this marker over here, set it to 0.52, but we want to change this color to black. And now you can see we're getting some nice stripes across our rock. And to make it affect our texture, we're going to add in a Mix RGB node. Make sure this is plugged into our factor, and then plug this in, as well as a RGB node. So let's add an RGB node and plug this into the bottom. Now we can pick any color that we want it to be. I'm going for a dark reddish color, somewhere along this. So that's looking good. And I don't really like the color of our rock right now, so I'm going to duplicate this mix shader, set it to add, keep the factor at 0.5, and I'm going to make it a little bit more of an orangish color, like that. So I think that looks good. Might brighten this up a little bit. Like that. And that's our texture. So I'm going to plug this into our diffuse shader here. And for our shader, we're actually going to add in a mix shader and a glossy shader. And I'm also going to add in a Fresnel node to affect the factor. Just like that. And I don't want this texture to be the color for a glossy texture. I actually want it to be a little bit lighter, so we're going to add in this hue saturation node and decrease the saturation to 0.25. So now it's a little bit lighter on the reflections instead of this dark color. And that's looking pretty good right now. I want to add in a color ramp node so that we can also affect the roughness of our glossy node. So I'm just going to plug it in like that. I'm going to make it a little bit brighter as well. So somewhere like that. And that's looking really good. We have a nice rock material now, but there's not much of a displacement yet. So let's create our bump for this. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, add in a color mix RGB, and add in a new color ramp node. Take this output again, plug it into the bottom, set this to add, set the factor to 1, duplicate this color ramp again, and take the output from our color ramp that creates the stripe and plug it into the top. And let's take a look at that. It's looking pretty good. I might want to decrease this factor to 0.25, something like that. And if we play around with these sliders now, we can make the stripes a little bit skinnier if we want by dragging it in like that. And then we can also drag this in to make it a little more deeper, the bumps. And I think that's looking good. I'm going to actually invert the colors by adding an invert node like that. And I'll just plug this into our displacement. And it's already looking pretty good. I might drag this white value back a little bit like that. And I think that's pretty good. But now what I want to do is edit the shape a little bit. So we're going to tab into edit mode, enable proportional editing by pressing O, and we can select one of these vertices over here and press G and scroll with the middle mouse button to increase the area of influence and just move this around. So we want to just create a basic rock shape, something like this. Maybe pull one of these vertices in a little bit like that. And I'm going to go to top view and pull this out. Make it a little bit more skinny along this edge so it comes to a point somewhat. And I might pull that in a little bit too. And basically you just want to create a random shape that looks like a rock. So I think that's looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is add in a displace modifier so we can get some more detail. I'm going to name this texture big. Go over to our texture settings and switch it to clouds and increase the size to 1. And if we go back to our modifier tab, we can decrease the strength to 0.5. And we're going to add another subsurf modifier, set it to 2, another displace modifier, and this time we'll name it medium. And in the texture settings, we'll decrease the size to 0.25 and decrease the strength to 0.1. And then we'll add one more subsurf modifier and one more displacement modifier. And this time we're going to name it small. And in the texture settings, we'll decrease the size to 0.1 and decrease the strength to 0.05. And now you can see we're getting a really nice rock with some very nice details. So that's looking pretty good. But it's really dense, and if we add a lot of these rocks to our scene, it'll take a long time to render. So what we can do is create a normal map for these small details. So to do that, we're going to duplicate this icosphere. Actually, I'm going to delete that. And we're going to tab into edit mode first, select everything, and press or open up a UV image editor. Create a new texture, name it rock norm, and I'm going to increase the size to 2048 like that, and then take this and change it to UV grid and create a new image like that. We're going to save it as rock norm, and you want to make sure that in the material here that we have our image texture that we just created. So just open up rock norm, and then we're going to unwrap it by pressing U and Smart UV Project, so we can just quickly UV unwrap our icosphere here. And now we can tab out of edit mode and duplicate it, and right click to apply it, and then we'll delete the last subsurf and displacement modifier. And we want to make sure that the first icosphere is selected, the high detail one, and then the lower detail one selected next. And we'll come over to the render settings here, and under bake we're going to switch the bake type to normal, check selected to active, and increase this ray distance to 1. And then I'm just going to press bake now, and I'll pause and come back when it's done. Alright, so it's done baking, but one thing I forgot to do is get rid of this displacement here, because we don't want to bake this displacement. So I want to make sure that's not connected, select our image texture again, and just bake it one more time. Alright, so it's done baking and this looks really nice. So now we can save this as rock norm again, and we can take our high detail rock and move it to a different layer. And in this lower density rock, we're going to just move this image texture here. We want to make sure we have our UV coordinates plugged into it. And since this is a normal map, we want to use non-color data because it's not actually adding any color to our mesh. Otherwise you'll get some weird artifacts. So I'm going to duplicate this color ramp and plug it in. And if we go to rendered view and look at our displacement here, I actually want to plug this one into the top instead so that we can get that to mix with it. And now we have more of this fine detail, and I will duplicate this add node, plug it in like that, and set the factor to 1 this time. Take a look at that, inverted, and that's looking good. So now we can plug this in here, plug this into our displacement, and there we go, a really nice looking rock material inside of Blender. And it's not as high detail as this one was over here. This is extremely dense. This one not as bad. So now we'll start working on our grass for our scene. First thing we want to do is add in a plane by pressing Shift A, and then we're going to tab into edit mode, rotate it on X by 90 degrees, and move it up on the Z axis by 1. We'll press S and X to scale it along the X axis by 0.0 or 0.1, nope, 0.05. And then I'll press Control R to add in some loop cuts like this. Select these top 2 vertices, press O to enable proportional editing, and then scale it on the X axis like that so we get a nice grass blade. And I'm going to press W, merge, center for the top. And I'll disable proportional editing so I can just scale those in a little bit, like that. And I think that's looking nice, so we can tab into edit mode, select our top vertice, enable proportional editing, and now we can start rotating this around and creating our grass bundle here. So I'm just going to speed this up really quickly, and I'll come back when it's done. Alright, so I'm done creating these grass blades here. I'm just going to select them all and press Ctrl J so that they're all one object now. And I'm going to give it a smooth shading and add a subsurf modifier as well as a solidify modifier. So I can just add some slight thickness like that. So it's very thin. Whoops. Something like that's good. Now we can work on creating the material, so let's name it grass. Let's also name this grass. And I'm also going to name our icosphere rock. And we can go into rendered view now. And let's start with a noise texture for our grass. Plug it in. Let's take a look. We want to add in a color ramp, and let's bring this detail up to 16, and we're going to make this black a really dark green, so let's move it all the way there, dark like that, and drag it up. And we want to make this yellowish color, something like that maybe. And just drag this in slightly. Let's take a look at how it is. Maybe we have to move these back a little bit, like that. And now we can take a look and see. It looks pretty good. I'm going to drag this back so it's not as prominent. And what I want to do is create an effect where as it goes to the top it gets lighter, a gradient effect. So I'm just going to quickly change this to object like that and add in a gradient texture. Plug this into the UVs. We're going to tab into edit mode, select everything, go to front view and press U, project from view bounds. And if we add in a color ramp after this gradient texture and take a look, we can see that it's going from black to white as it goes left to right. So we want to rotate this by 90 degrees, and now it's black on the bottom. And then we can drag this slider up to about there, which is good. And now we're going to add in a color mix RGB node. Set this to add 0.25. And we just want to make a lighter version of this, so let's make it a light yellow color. We can see that it's much lighter than it was before, which is exactly what we want. Might make this a little brighter. And we'll duplicate this, switch it to mix, plug this color ramp into the factor, and then plug these two in like that. And right now you can see it's getting light to darker, so that means we need to flip these two. And that's the effect we're going for. So we can drag this back a little bit so there's more light area like that. And then I'm just going to drag all of these, whoops, I'm going to drag all of these back there and plug it into our diffuse shader like that. Then we're going to add in a mix shader. Whoops. Plug this in, add in a glossy shader. And we're going to duplicate this mix shader and add in a translucent shader like that. We're also going to add in a Fresnel node to affect our glossiness. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to add in a color ramp node so that we can actually increase the contrast of this, so we can get something like that. Okay, it's looking good. I'm going to drag these two back, plug this into our factor of the mix shader, and decrease this roughness to 0. We can take a look at our material, and I want to add in a hue saturation value node right in here. Plug our texture into it, and plug it into our glossy and translucent shader. Just decrease the saturation to 0.75. And that's looking pretty good. It's looking a little dark now though, and I think that might be because of the solidify modifier. And so I'm just going to get rid of that. I think I'm also going to get rid of the subsurf modifier because it's not really doing much for our model. Okay, now we can create our ground floor. So I'm just going to add an image as plane and select this rock texture that I have here. And in edit mode, in the UV image editor, I'm going to scale up the texture by 100. Then tab out of edit mode and scale up our plane by 10, and we can take a look at it. And it looks pretty nice, but it's really flat right now. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this texture here, and switch it to non-color data and add in a color ramp. And we can take a look at this right now, zoom in to our rocks, and just increase this contrast to something like that, and plug this into our displacement so we can get some bumps. And that'll look a lot better. Okay, now we can tab into edit mode, subdivide it. I'm going to press T to bring up this toolbar here, increase the number of cuts to 10, and then subdivide it one more time and increase the number of cuts to 2. And now I can add a subsurf modifier, add in a displacement modifier. We just want to select our medium texture, decrease the strength to 0.25, add in another subsurf modifier, and add another displacement modifier. And we're going to check our small texture again and set the strength to 0.05. And just like that, we have our ground plane done really quickly. I'm going to decrease the strength to 0.1 so it's not as large of a bump. And that looks really good. So now what we have to do is create our particle system. So come over here to particle settings, click new, switch it to hair, and we want to check advanced. And I'm going to come down here to the render settings and switch it to object. Whoops. And in the display settings, I'm going to decrease the display to about 10% so that the viewport won't lag as much. And we'll check our grass object. And then I'm going to check rotation as well. And we'll set the random size to 0.75. And I want to check rotation here. And change it to normal so that it's facing along the normals. And right now they're all sideways, and the only way to fix that is to take our grass model here, select it, and we have to rotate it 90 degrees like that. And now our grass should be sticking up along the right way. I'm going to select our ground plane and just give it a smooth shading like that. And that's looking pretty good. But right now we don't have nearly enough faces or particles, so I'm going to increase this to 35,000, which should be a good amount. And this is only displaying 10% of them, so I think that's enough. And we want to add in a texture to affect the density of our particle system. So come down to textures, new, go to the texture setting and switch it to Voronoi. And in this color panel we want to open it up and check ramp. And for our first slider we want to bring the alpha up all the way to 1. Seems to be lagging. And now we can change this to a lighter gray. Maybe something like that. Might bring that down a bit. Okay, that's looking good. And I want to increase this contrast to 2. And and I think that's good. So we're going to come down here to time and uncheck it in the influence tab, and instead we're going to check density. And over here you can see that now in these areas it's not as dense with the particles, so that it automatically makes it look much more realistic. I might increase this to 2.5 instead, and I think that's looking good. I might make this a little bit brighter, so that's pretty good. Okay, we can go back to our particle settings now, and I think this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to come over here, check our camera, and move it to our third layer. And I'm also going to duplicate this rock and move the duplicate to the third layer as well. And now I can position my camera where I want to, so I'll go to front view, press Ctrl Alt 0 to snap it to view, and Alt G to put it in the center of our scene. And I'm just going to drag it back out and position it exactly where I want to. So maybe about there, and then just rotate it on the x-axis. Something like that's pretty good. And I can select this rock here. I'm going to just hide, whoops, that's not the rock. This is. And I can hide all of these modifiers like that. And now I can position it where I want to so that we can create our interesting scene. So I'm just going to scale it down, maybe rotate it a little bit like that, and then press Alt D to make a duplicate and just move it around, and press R twice so that we can get the trackball rotation, and scale it down and put it wherever you want so that we can create random rock formations, which will look pretty natural once it's complete. So you just want to keep pressing Alt D and rotating these around randomly, sticking them in the ground like that, rotating along the Z-axis, maybe putting one closer like that and rotating it upside down. And basically this part you can have fun, put them wherever you want these to be, and it'll look good in the end as long as you don't overdo it. Okay, maybe rotate that the other way and position it there. And I'm gonna add one all the way over here and scale it down quite a bit. Rotate it like that, move it up so we can see it, and I'll put it right there. Maybe one more up in the front over here. Just move it up on the Z-axis, rotate it like that, and I think that's looking pretty good. So let's go over to the render settings over here, and I want to check borders, so when we go to rendered view we can only see what's in this border area, and right now it looks really dark, and that's because we don't have any extra lights. So we're going to add in another plane, give it a new material, set it to emission, make it a light orange color, something like that, set it to 5, might change that color a little bit, and then go to side view, rotate it by -45, scale it up by 5, go to top view and rotate it by 20, and then just position it right about there, and then move it up on the Z-axis so you get something like that. And then we want to go to our object settings, and under cycle settings uncheck camera so that's not visible in the one rendered, and we can duplicate this plane, move it over here, rotate it by -20 and then -90, whoops, rotate by -90 and just position it right about there. And we want to press 2 on this material so we can change it. And I'm going to set the strength to 2.5 and make it a light blue color like that. If we go to rendered view now, we should be able to see it that it looks much better. And yeah, that's looking a lot better. So now what we can do is I'm going to go to the render settings here, just decrease the samples to about 10. I'm going to render and come back when it's done. Alright, so it's done rendering and it doesn't look that bad, but this grass is a little too dark and these rocks are a little too bright. So what I'm going to do is select this rock here, and we're going to go to the node editor here, and I'm going to add in a mix RGB node right in there. Let's go to our rock layer here and press Shift Z to go to rendered view, and I'm going to change this to multiply, set the factor to 1, and then we can decrease this so that it'll be darker. And if we go back to our scene here, we can check it out to see how it compares to our grass, and I think it looks much better this way. Maybe make it a little bit more darker. I'm going to just set this value to 0.5. And then I'm going to go to our grass material here, and this is a little too dark, so I might make this a little bit brighter like that. And let's check that out now. And it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna pause it right now and render it again, and I'll come back when it's done. Alright, so it's done rendering and I think it looks much better than this previous render here. So now let's take it into the compositor and see what we can do. So control left click to go to the compositor and control up arrow to make it full screen. Just check backdrop, control shift and left click to bring up this viewer node here. And I'm going to add in an image of a sky that I made in Blender. So let me just find that real quick. There it is. And I'm going to press Shift A, color alpha over, and plug this in and use this alpha channel. Right now this sky doesn't seem to fit with our scene, so I'm going to add in a transform or translate node right in there. So now I can increase this Y value. I'm going to set it to 250, and that's looking much better. And I want the sky to be somewhat of orangish color so it looks more like the afternoon. So I'm going to add in a RGB curve right there, and I'm going to increase this red value like that, decrease the greens to about there, and decrease the blues all the way to there. And that's looking pretty nice, but I'm going to add in a color balance node as well and just make it slightly more orange in all the directions like that. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to drag these back a little bit, and now we're going to add in a vignette. So I'm going to just add in a ellipse mask, increase this to about about there, and then increase this to about there, and then Shift A, filter blur, fast Gaussian, relative Y, and then 25 by 25, and then Shift A, color mix, plug both of these in and set it to multiply. And then you have a nice vignette, but we're not done yet. We're going to go back here, make sure we have our render result here. Whoops. And just control shift and left click the last node. We're going to come over here to the scene settings, check color management, and set this to film instead. And we're going to bring up the exposure to 1 and the gamma to 2. And that's already looking much nicer. And now I'm going to check use curves as well, and I might make this a little bit darker like that. And then I'm going to increase the reds to about there, the greens to about there as well, and then I'm just going to increase the blues to there. And that's looking pretty nice. You can play around with these colors to get something that you like. Maybe you want it to be a little bit brighter. I don't know, I think right about there looks pretty good. So then if you like it, you can increase the samples. I'm going to render this out at about 250 samples, and I'll come back when it's done. Alright, so it's done rendering and it looks pretty good, guys. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned something new. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys, and thanks for watching. Bye.